Weishaupt's revised plan required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them accomplish their purpose. 1. Use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of people already occupying positions in high places in the various levels of all government and other fields of human endeavor. Once an influential person had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail and threats of financial ruin, public exposure, and physical harm, and even death to themselves and their loved ones. Number 12 told those present that they must use their wealth to have candidates chosen to public office who would be obedient to their demands and would be used as pawns in the game by the men behind the scenes.
Besides the Vatican, Freemasonry is the greatest threat to survival on this human planet at the current time, and to individual freedoms and collective freedom.
Why mafia goes on and on? Because mafia is something rooted in society. The mafia is infiltrating the economy, business.
November 2021, Italian law enforcement were jubilant, for good reason. Over 100 arrests had been made across the country, targeting the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, one of the most powerful mafia groups in the world, responsible for untold violence and worth tens of billions of dollars. Amongst the property seizures and dizzyingly large cocaine busts, a few strange details went under the radar. For one, how a batch of coke that had made its way from South America was stamped with a logo featuring an eye and a compass, the universally known symbol of Freemasonry. It wasn't a one-off. Further packets revealed the same symbol alongside the Greek letter Alpha and Omega. For some, it sparked concern about an increasing coziness between mob bosses and Masonic lodges across southern Italy, with their alleged rogues gallery of corrupt senior police officers, grasping politicians, and local business elites. Just how deep does it go? Welcome to the business of crime. In this episode, we're going to be taking a closer look at the alleged links between Italian mafia groups and the country's Masonic lodges, a connection that has a long, if not always entirely clear-cut, history.
But most of the time, Masonry is only criticized on the basis of their stupid beliefs. And I would argue that that is the worst possible attempt to kind of try to tackle them. Instead, a structural critique of Masonry is needed. Let me explain what I mean. For example, how many members of Senate, Congress, and government in general, for example, in the United States, are Masons? And the same in the UK, in Europe, and all other continents and nations. What percentage? Even if it is just 25%, that would be a huge number. Right? They don't have to control everything. Just enough. So this video snippet from Vice is quite good. It shows you the kind of corruption, for example, that was going on in Italy by the Masons and is still going on.
Few organizations have captured public imagination and suspicion over the years quite like the Freemasons. With their secrecy, obscure membership criteria, and long history of suspected corruption, they're a group, it's safe to say, that have attracted their fair share of mistrust. Globally, it's estimated there are around 6 million Freemasons, with a particularly strong presence in the UK, US, and Italy. Though things aren't quite as mysterious as they once were about the group's inner workings, it's still an organization with significant secrets.
We have to keep in mind that the Freemasonry and the Mafia have many things in common. Both organizations, for example, share values of humility. They share the respect for rules, the respect for the hierarchy. Like Freemasonry, the Mafia has initiation rituals and rules of behavior rooted in secrecy.
In Italy, the bond between Freemasonry and Mafia groups in the South has a long, complicated history. There are superficially shared values. Both were heavily repressed between the 1920s until the end of World War II as potential threats to the power of Mussolini's fascist state.
Freemasonry itself is the legal mafia. Since the speculative Masons emerged out of the Templars, we can clearly ascertain that they are the left wing of the Vatican, if the Jesuits are the right wing.
And both have a long, contentious relationship with the pillars of Italian political and commercial society, one where rumors of collusion and corruption are never too far from the surface.
The fact that the 'Ndrangheta is well connected and deeply rooted in the society, with connection to politicians, businessmen, police officers, magistrates, judges, and that's the strain of the mafia.
In a wiretapped conversation in 2013, one 'Ndrangheta boss, Pantaleone Mancuso, summed up the relationship. The 'Ndrangheta is no longer, he said. The Freemasons remain. In 2017, a series of police raids discovered 193 high-ranking members of the Sicilian Mafia and the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta to be members of lodges across the South. According to the work of dogged prosecutors and the testimony of mob turncoats, the secrecy of Masonic lodges provided the perfect place to conduct shady deals with figures from the business and political elite. Later, a series of local lodges in Calabria were dissolved after discovery of mobsters on their books.
The problem with Freemasonry, again, is a structural one. I don't give a shit what they believe. I don't like what they believe, but that is not the basis on which I will assault them. The assault on Masonry should be philosophical, and it should be a structural critique of the structures it creates. Not a faith-based, zealotic, stupid poppycock that everybody will just see as fanatical hogwash.
One case which has become infamous is that of Giovanni Zumbo. A well-respected Calabrian accountant, he had made a name for himself, managing properties seized from organized crime on behalf of the courts. But Zumbo was later convicted of mafia crimes after law enforcement discovered that he had been tipping off one notorious local boss about a looming arrest.
We have this guy, an accountant, that goes to Pelle, one of the biggest godfather of 'Ndrangheta, while he was on the run. He goes there and tells to the man, there are the recordings of this, telling, be careful, they are going to arrest you, they are going to make a big operation a week before, and giving also the exact numbers of people that they are going to be arrested. When it's going to arrest it himself.
How could an accountant get inside information about a sensitive police operation? Turns out one of his fellow Masons was a senior police officer on the same force. This is, critics allege, how the relationship works.
So Eric Ludendorff was one of the most effective of all enemies of Freemasonry. Not only did he and his wife Matilda worship Lord Krishna, as many Germans did during that time, just before everything got worse. He actually dismantled the entire Eastern European or Prussian Masonry in one swoop. He was the Grand Master of that chapter and he closed it. Now, he was stupid enough to believe that Hitler would help him, so he helped in the putsch, in the coup d'etat. And there was his mistake. But the content that he created exposes the secrets of Masonry. And exposes a lot of it. Not only does he expose what the Red Lodges or the Scottish Rite Lodges do, who control the lower degrees, but he also delves into the Black Lodges. And this is where it's getting most interesting. The problem with Masonry is that it is an executive without a head. And the head is removed from this executive branch. So that they never really know who actually puppeteers them. Ludendorff was very specific that it was the Jews who controlled Masonry, and I don't really know. I'm not a Mason. I don't know what is behind it, but what I can say is that it is wiser that we stop our own group from our nation that contributes to these malevolent agendas, whether they be from the Jews or Jesuits or whatever, or from fucking flying spaghetti monster. I don't give a shit. Because apparently only if we have such instruments like Masonry that help to facilitate their agenda are they a threat at all. This is like the Masonry is the hands.
Für die Geschichte der Völker kommen die Mitglieder der Roten Schottenlogen in Betracht, die in das öffentliche Leben der Völker als Werkzeuge der ihnen übergeordneten schwarzen oder geheimen Logen oder unmittelbar der unsichtbaren Väter eingreifen, je nachdem selbst handelnd, hemmend oder verwirrend oder mittelbar durch vergewaltigte, in Schuld verstrickte oder betörte Profane, aber in jedem Fall, um die Ziele des jüdischen Volkes verwirklichen zu helfen. Dahin leiten sie auch die Johanneslogen und beaufsichtigen, beeinflussen und bespitzeln die Brüder niederer Grade, damit sie in gleicher Zielrichtung arbeiten. Ob sie dabei bewusst oder auch aus freimaurerischer Suggestion heraus tätig sind, ist für die profane Welt gleich. Das Wesen der Hochgrade und ihrer politischen Absichten versinnbildlichen sich am besten durch die Schilderung der Aufnahme in eine schwarze, unsichtbare Loge, wie sie uns auch Hefata beschreibt, die nach derselben Quelle von den Schottenlogen unmittelbar zu den unsichtbaren Vätern führt. Hefata leitet sie mit der bei den Hochgradbrüdern üblichen Floskel ein, die ihn vor der Rache schützen soll, und schreibt dann, Zitat, »In einem Gewölbe, welches schwarz ausgeschlagen, mit Totenköpfen und Gerippen behangen oder verziert war, stand rechts und links ein Tisch. Auf dem rechts stehenden Tische stand ein Kruzifix, um welches eine Bibel, ein Koran und ein Talmud lagen. Über dem Tische las man in einem transparenten Felde »In allem Wahrheit«. Der Tisch zur Linken trug Pistolen, Degen und Giftpulver. Die Anschrift war »In der Hand des Weisen die letzten Heilmittel für Leib und Seele«. Bei der Aufnahme unterzeichnete der Kandidat seinen Namen mit Blut und niemanden des Bundes, keines seiner Mitglieder lernte er kennen. Die Loge war matt von einer düsteren Lampe erleuchtet und die Anwesenden erblickte der Kandidat nur wie in einem Nebel. Sie hatten lange schwarze Mäntel an und jeder von ihnen trug einen Dolch auf der Brust und hatte die rechte im Busen verborgen. Am Ende des Kreises saß ein Mann, vor welchem die Ordensglieder knieten, von denen der erste mit einer Krone, der andere mit einer Prälatentracht geschmückt war. Der dritte aber war in stählernem Harnisch, über welchem eine Löwenhaut hing. Zu diesem Knienden sagte der Mann im Mantel: Ihr habt euren Lohn empfangen, geht und bessert euch. Worauf sie aufstanden, sich demütig tief beugten und dann entfernten. Zitat Ende. Hierauf wurden dem Kandidaten schöne Lehren über die Menschlichkeit gegeben. Dann wird fortgefahren, Zitat: Nachdem der Aufzunehmende diese sauberen Lehren, die zuweilen noch verpestet wurden durch abnorme Zusätze, empfangen hatte, betäubte man ihn durch narkotische Dünste. Aus der Narkose erwachend liegt er in seinem Bett. Zitat Ende. Mit jüdischem Zynismus wurde hier das Geheimnis der Freimaurerei und die verbrecherischen Wege zur Verwirklichung ihrer Ziele in dem Ritual festgelegt. Der rechtsstehende Tisch sagt mit aller Deutlichkeit das, was heute die christgläubigen Nichtjuden noch immer nicht glauben wollen: Christentum und Mohammedismus sind dem Juden jüdische Konfessionen und haben als solche die Aufgabe, die in der Tora und dem Talmud unverhüllte Wahrheit dem Goi in verschleierter Form aufzudrängen. Darum die Worte: In allem ist die Wahrheit. Deshalb ist auch das letzte Ziel, alle jüdischen Konfessionen wieder in einer einzigen jüdischen Religion, in der liberalen katholischen Kirche, zu vereinigen, wie dies auch die alten Pflichten des Jahres 1723 schon deutlich ankündigen. Der Tisch zur Linken kündet, dass Kriege und Morde aller Art der Weg und das Gift, Kampf- und Mordwaffen die Mittel sind, die Talmud-Wahrheiten und die grausame, blutrünstige Herrschaft der Juden über alle Völker der Erde zu verwirklichen. Der Weise, der für diese Endziele mordet und morden lässt, ist ein Wohltäter und Befreier, und diejenigen, die durch Pistole, Degen und Gift umgebracht werden, werden nach den hohnvollen Worten an Leib und Seele geheilt. Die drei Gestalten vor dem schwarzen Vater sind König, Priester und Krieger. Sie haben ahnungslos in dem vergangenen Jahrtausend der geheimen Judenherrschaft dem Juden gedient und werden nun, nachdem sie diesen Zweck erfüllt und die Judenherrschaft sichtbar gegründet haben, hohnvoll entlassen, das heißt vernichtet. Was die Johannesloge noch teilweise verhüllt, was in den Schottengraden nur schrittweise deutlicher enthüllt wird, ist hier, in dieser schwarzen Loge, offen kundgetan. Es wird sich jedem Leser bildhaft und unauslöschlich einprägen müssen, um den Inhalt dieser Schrift voll in sich aufzunehmen. Die Menschlichkeitslehren der unsichtbaren Väter werden selbst in den bis in die schwarzen Logen vorgedrungenen Schottenbrüdern noch nicht einmal überall ohne die letzte Enthüllung gegeben. Narkotische Dünste haben den Maurer in der Loge betäubt, der Wille wurde ihm genommen, willensgelähmt wird er der profanen Welt zurückgegeben, als ein willenloses Werkzeug in der Hand der Oberen. Narkotischen Dünsten vergleichbar wirken die Suggestionen auf alle Maurer und dringen aus den Freimaurerlogen und anderen Logen, wie sie auch heißen mögen, ins Volk und nehmen ihm das klare Denken. Sie durchdringen seine arteigene Kultur und formen die gesamte öffentliche Meinung.
If we cut off the hands from the head, then the head cannot do anything. So I believe actually there is an occult hierarchy behind this, and certain elements of certain groups are within that. But it does not matter what I believe. Important is that if Masonry ceases to exist, then whatever commands they give, they won't be executed. And you know, that was the problem also with the Nazis. They believed in like it's the Jews who control this system. And to a minor degree that is the case. But that's not the whole picture. That's one part. So, the controllers of Masonry, whoever they may be, if Masonry doesn't exist, they control nothing. Of course, the Vatican and other organizations follow the same bullshit as Masonry. But Masonry is that which connects all these things. So it is the construct that needs to be destroyed.
King Herod Agrippa said, quote, "We will use the hammer because it was used to nail Jesus' hands and feet. Every session will be opened by striking the hammer 3 times," end quote. And you notice that judges have the hammer to bring order to the court. King Herod Agrippa said, quote, "We will make degrees. These will be 33, symbolizing the age of the impostor." And on November 43 AD, the first official session was held in the first temple of Jerusalem, which was a basement in the palace of King Herod Agrippa. The meeting of the mysterious force was always held in the temple. That was the name, the temple. And in 1717, modern Freemasonry changed it to the name of Lodge. To prove that Masonry is of Jewish origin, here are the following quotes. The Rabbi Isaac Weiss wrote in 1855, quote, "Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees assigned them, signs, and explanations are of Jewish nature from beginning to end," end quote. The Jewish historian Bernard Lazare wrote, quote, "It is evident that there are only Jews and Kabbalistic Jews in Masonry's origin," end quote. And finally, Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism in 1897 in Switzerland, said, quote, "Masonic lodges are established all over the world to offer us help to achieve our independence. Those pigs and non-Jewish Masons will never understand the final objects of Masonry," end quote.
President Barack Obama concludes his 3-day trip to Israel today, and it began early with a trip to Mount Herzl, where he laid a wreath on the tomb of Theodor Herzl, the Zionist visionary who imagined the state of Israel, but who died 40 years before it came into being.
The Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 12, we read, quote, "For the majority of Jews, the Talmud is still the supreme authority in religion," end quote. And the Talmud is the written word of the oral tradition of the Pharisees. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, page 637, says, quote, "The ultimate authority for orthodoxy is the Babylonian Talmud," end quote. In the Talmud, the Catholic holy day is called the Day of Evil. A Christian church is called a house of evil. It is permitted for Christians to be defrauded and deceived. All Christians, including the best of them, should be killed. It's page 172 of the Jewish Encyclopedia. It says that Christ is in hell, punished with boiling hot excrement. And basically, the Talmudic Jews are the main force bringing about, the main power. There are many tentacles of this arm.
Right, anyway,
we digress, as we often do.
Anyway, so the idea with the book was scholarly focus. I don't want any hearsay. I want what actually happened. But also, in going through this, I found a lot of interesting gems of Masonic activities, things that were never published in Masonic papers before, which I'm really proud of. I mean, stuff like, Abraham Lincoln receiving a Knights Templar escort to an event in D.C. All the activities associated with, First Ladies, that's never covered in any Masonic journal.
Yeah, were any of them Eastern Star members? Right?
Exactly. Not just that, but they participated in Masonic activities as First Ladies. I mean, how many of those activities have you seen?
Yeah, when Washington was down in the pit laying the cornerstone, where was Martha? She had to be nearby.
Well, okay, yeah. So it starts, and by the way, it does start with George Washington, and we go chronologically all the way to, we actually end with Bush Jr., so George W. Bush.
I've got to ask you a couple questions about your research. Was there something that you found about a particular president that was surprising, or was there an event that was just the most eye-opening for you in terms of the crossover between Freemasonry and the U.S. presidency?
I think the one thing that really got me was, it's not one specific event, but it was a series of presidents that you wouldn't expect. So Calvin Coolidge, for example, he lost his son during the presidency. And he was relatively quiet. He didn't really speak. It was, the silent Cal, right? And so he didn't really do a lot of activities outside the White House. He didn't really spend a little time a lot at the White House. But every year, he attended Masonic religious services. They were non-denominational services. Mm-hmm. Herbert Hoover, participated in Masonic events. I guess one of the things that I really like to talk about is Ulysses S. Grant, not a Freemason. His dad was a Freemason. His dad actually helped charter a lodge back home, but he never joined the fraternity. Well, when he's in D.C., he is attending. I found so many, I had to sit there and go, wait a minute, am I double counting the 20 or 30 Masonic activities I found for Ulysses S. Grant. And many of those were associated to the Knights Templar, many associated with like activities that were happening at the White House, right? So for example, from Ulysses S. Grant all the way to Herbert Hoover, regularly Knights Templar marched on the White House. It was an annual inspection ceremony. So they lined up, they marched to the White House, they opened the White House gates, they went through, and whoever the president was at the time would stand at the balcony or the north portico and salute the brethren as they came by. And it was part of a thing that happened in Washington. It was a tradition that would happen in Washington. And so Washington, D.C. becomes a major player. So I think that's probably the most significant, where we always have this connection to the presidents. We always have this connection, oh, there are 14 or 15 Masonic presidents, and they did all these activities. But no one ever said, well, what are those activities? No one actually wrote them down. Here, I gave you about 453 Masonic interactions, and that's just in DC. My publisher said, take all this non-DC stuff out, because if you did, you're literally going to do 2 books.
Right. The question has to come up, and I've done videos on the number of guys that signed the Declaration of Independence that were Masons,
Sure.
the number on the
Less than
Constitution, and so many people think it's like, oh, there's so many, the whole Constitution, the
No
whole
way.
Declaration, and it was just not true. Of our 46 presidents that we've had, how many that we know of can you say for certain were Freemasons?
The number depends.
Okay, fair.
But
That's fair.
Yes, but it depends on your interpretation of what is a Mason. And that's a weird way to start it, but here's the thing. There are 14 Master Masons. There are 14 that we know that went through, entered apprentice to Master Mason degree. Lyndon B. Johnson, do you consider Lyndon B. Johnson a Mason? If you were an entered apprentice Mason, and this is for the folks on the video as well, you became an entered apprentice Mason, and unfortunately, you hate to hear it, you die. Do you receive a Masonic funeral? Are you considered a Mason?
It depends. It depends. If you die and your family came to me as the master of a lodge and said, would you do the funeral rites? I would absolutely do it as long as the Grand Lodge allowed it. And your mileage may vary, Grand Lodge.
And it depends on the Grand Lodge. I understand that.
If you were a guy who joined the craft and then walked away for whatever reason, you didn't do your catechism or something of that nature, you just decided, you know what, and I can understand that. There are people that come in, they become entered apprentices, and they go, you know what, this just isn't for me. I'm going to go another way. Understandable.
That's mostly what Lyndon B. Johnson did.
Then I say no, he was not a Mason.
Okay. So if you were to count Johnson,
definitely an asterisk.
Absolutely. And by the way, included in the book, the whole story about what happened is included in the book. By the way, there were also 2 or 3 other presidential administrations that had some weird, quirky. So for example, Warren G. Harding was blackballed for a fellow craft.
Really?
He became an entered apprentice Mason. He was blackballed to move forward for a fellow craft. Harding then leaves, he's not, okay, great, thanks. Goes on, continues his political career. He is nominated the presidential nominee for the Republican Party in that year. The lodge comes back and says, whoever the person was, it got resolved. They bring him back, and during the campaign, he is brought back and receives the Fellowcraft and the Master Mason degree.
Huh.
Teddy Roosevelt does not become a Mason until after the election, right? So he is elected vice president. He is interested in joins Freemasonry. Taft, right? William Howard Taft does not become a Freemason until after his election to president, and he's elected on site. Taft, in doing my research, Taft was the first president I can find that had an issue with the Secret Service. So you remember, we have this thing about Truman where, Truman said to a Secret Service agent, I'm safer in the lodge room than I am outside. Here. Right. Well, Taft becomes a Master Mason the next meeting or the first meeting he attends after his initiation. Well, he gets there, the Secret Service weren't allowed to enter the room because none of them were Master Masons. He didn't think about it. In the newspaper clipping, it sort of says something like, while the president was allowed to enter, the Secret Service were allowed to,
Because that would not happen in today's world.
That is probably the best Tyler in the universe, who was just like, no, you are not a Mason.
I do not see that happening today.
I know your job is Secret Service, right, but no, you are not allowed to enter.
Looking over all of these, there are certain names where we hear them included on lists of Masonic presidents, and we know that they are not. And one that jumps to mind immediately, you mentioned one already, but I'll start with the first one. Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
Family connections to Masonry.
Okay.
I've heard his family, he's had, his dad or his brothers or something like that were Masons.
Okay.
Jefferson, not a Mason, though.
Doesn't make him a Mason just because his family, yeah.
He appears in the minutes of a public or a dinner that they had.
It was a cornerstone laying ceremony.
Right, and people say, oh, he's a Mason. Not a Mason.
So here's what happened. There was an article, actually there was a series of articles in the New Age magazine for the Scottish Rite. William Boyden, who's the librarian at the time, was fascinated and slightly obsessed with Thomas Jefferson becoming
I can understand it.
So he compiles 120, it's sort of like what I did with this book. He compiles 120, he goes through all the periodicals and any research that was done by Masons, because the House of the Temple Library, you have access to all that research. And so he publishes this article in the New Age that basically is Thomas Jefferson a Freemason? Here are all the references to Jefferson. The problem with it is he is listing, and he even mentions it, this is all hearsay. Here it's listed that he attended a lodge. There's no record of it. Here he is attended to have written a letter to a Mason. There's no record of it. So are all these references to Jefferson attending or participating in Mason? There's no record of it. There's only one. And here's even, now to Boyden's credit, which I appreciate, he says, well, here's the definitive proof, but it's not really that great. This is after he's president. He attends a cornerstone laying for a university in Virginia. He is there with the other presidents. He is there with the surviving members of, the founding fathers, etc. And so the way the secretary wrote it was the lodge opened, right? It opened to conduct its procession. They formed a procession. They went, they laid the cornerstone. Then they all returned to the lodge hall, and then they closed. So Boyden and all these other people are like, well, the secretary wrote that they all returned to the lodge hall, and then they closed it down. So it's like, okay, so basically the secretary forgot to say, or write, all the Masons returned to the lodge hall.
So Thomas Jefferson, definitively not a Mason.
Not a lot of evidence. Without any evidence, I'm not going to call it.
I have spoken personally to the man who's the head of the museum dedicated to the other president that a lot of people want to include as a Mason, but just no proof, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln allegedly planned on petitioning a lodge and either withdrew his petition or did not feel like it was appropriate to petition as he was getting an election at the time. And it was this is about the time that he was running against Stephen Douglas, and the Lincoln-Douglas debates were going on. And there's no proof of any of that. It's conjecture.
Right.
And I have spoken to the head of that museum, and he said, it sounds plausible, it sounds reasonable, but we don't have any evidence of it. So Lincoln, what is you mentioned earlier that he had a Knight Templar escort at the White House.
Yeah.
What else?
The Knights Templar escort is brought to you by Benjamin B. French, right? So this, we had a whole video on who Benjamin B. French was. By virtue of Benjamin B. French being a part of his inner circle at the White House as a commissioner of public buildings, French didn't push him, but you can tell French was interested. So in a letter to I think it's correct here, is the past Grand Master of New York writes to French after Lincoln's dead. It says, what was going on? Was he ever interested in Freemasonry? And in the letter, Benjamin French writes, he had a conversation with Lincoln at one point that basically said he would be interested in doing it. And by the way, the full extract is in the book, so you can just read it in the book. That he said that he would do it, or he would consider it after his administration. So would he have done it? Likely. I think I'm more of the opinion that he would have. He had such a good relationship with Benjamin B. French. There was a lot going on there, and I think he would have been a Mason after the administration, and he had a really good relationship with French to enable him to do that.
I'm curious as to, do you have a favorite president and then a favorite Masonic president? Are they the same? Are they different?
Truman.
And let's just, for the sake of not being boring, let's take Washington off the plate.
I don't consider Washington to be my favorite.
No, okay.
I think he's like, if you're going to rate these like it's a sports,
I mean, who's your Mount Rushmore?
Top tier. Mount Rushmore, Teddy Roosevelt. I think I really like Teddy Roosevelt, not because he was a super duper Mason, but he was one of these individuals that just like read every book.
Oh yeah.
He just attacked
He was a
everything.
character.
He was just so smart and just like, I'm going to go off and do this. Like, oh, the Rough Riders are going to ride again. I'm like, you are a president. Why are you bringing your guns out? Like, like these kinds of things.
You're not supposed to be storming up the hill here.
He created these myths. And in fact, the myth about Teddy Roosevelt attending a lodge where his gardener was the master and he was sitting there, well, they did some research on it, and that's not actually true. But it was just this Teddy Roosevelt. Of course I did. Look at me. I was at a lodge. I attended. The way that they just figured it out was he could not have attended that meeting because that year when he was president, that guy was not the master. So his claim that he was the master that year, Anyway, but that's Teddy Roosevelt, right? He was just like, I'm going to get into this. Of course, look how humble I am. I'm the president of the United States, and my lonely gardener, my humble, gardener is sitting as the worshipful master. He just had this like power for life. He also did a lot of public activities in DC with the Masons. He laid a couple cornerstones. He was very active. And the day he left office, or either the day or the day after, and it's written in the book, he gave the Grand Master of DC like this umbrella hanger, but that was like from a foot of an elephant that he got while on safari. Like they cut off the foot and they carved it into an umbrella holder. And he was like, this is my gift for you. Thank you for, gee whiz, thanks for the Masons for doing everything. And I'm like, that's Teddy Roosevelt.
Right. So there's
Mount Rushmore,
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Andrew Johnson, not for his policies, but for how he just was like, I'm open and interested in Freemasonry. He was the
The entire system gains its power by means of consent. The birth certificate, the second birth each child has, which is a biological waste product that they collect, and the entire straw man thing is the real problem. And that is perpetuated both by the Vatican, who controls all canon law and hence maritime admiralty law, and secondly, Masonry. For Masonry poses so many of these judges and doctors and congressmen, statesmen, policemen, all Masons, or not all of them, but so many. It's never all. We are not fanatics, but we can see what they do. As long as both Masonry and the Vatican pose this maritime admiralty law, this net they have spun over the earth and the waters and over all of us, for we are their liquid assets, there will be no freedom, and no freedom from the reincarnation cycle. And what I want is freedom from the cycle. And yes, I as an individual can step out of it, but mankind cannot. There's no collective awakening unless the Vatican or the Holy See is dissolved. That sea that is the Samsara or the river Viraj, which is all of us. All of us.
This is also the reason for such organizations as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and is the basis for all of the New Age works and symbolism that is in preparation for the new Golden Age that is upon us. To be primordial means to go back to the beginning, or to be put into our original state once again. And seeing that the word primordial also means cardinal, capital, head, main, prime, it is most likely the reason that the capital of each state is funding this adventure, where the singularity will simply mark the ending of this era as a species before we are brought back once again to a primitive beginning on the one side, or to a fourth dimensional brave new world scenario on the other. This will be dependent upon whether or not one decides to merge with the technology and become a cyborg, or not. Either way, the first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first, and the entire cycle will start all over again. That's when dust shall be the serpent's meat, because the one side of the equation will be taken back to original sin, just after the fall of man came about with the original arrival of the moon, sin, and the beginning of our duality in knowledge. This will be the situation for those who refuse to merge into the technological singularity, while those who choose to become cyborgs will be transitioned into the alternate quadrality, where their free will is stripped from them even further. That was one of the very subtle yet profound allegories in the architect scene of the second Matrix movie, whereby Neo made the choice of love, thus evolution, seeing that the first 4 letters of evolution is love spelled backwards. This choice required that the human race would go extinct according to the architect, and with the opening of the door to love, evolution, Neo symbolized both the extinction of humankind and the next stage of evil that is prepared for everyone who chooses to become a cyborg, and is telling everyone that one of the eyes, or suns in our binary system, was taken from us. There had been 2 suns in our sky in the past, and then one was taken away, killed, blotted out. It is abnormal for us to live with only 1 sun in our system. Yet this is what everyone has become accustomed to. And try telling anyone that there should be 2 suns in the sky, and they'll call you mad. Chiram Abiff, from the Freemasonic allegory, was the second sun that was taken out and killed in the age of Taurus. It is the black hole sun that received a black eye, since a biff in boxing is a blow that is given with a fist, and the Latin fistuca means rammer, mallet, stalk, beetle, as related to the Freemasonic mallet and the fists used in boxing. Fistuca is also a Latin synonym of the Latin word matrixa, translated as stem, since this correlates with the stem known as our spine. It was the blow of the mallet that biffed and blew out the second eye, or sun, in our sky by making it black. It is now the black box of Saturn, which is why the black eye biff given in the rings of Saturn is also something that is done in the sport called boxing. That's why if someone punches you in the eye, you get a black eye. Photons create the wave, and the observer collapses the wave. Photon is also our connection to the mythology of the dead sun Phaeton. It could easily be surmised that photon equals phaeton. Phaeton means shining sun, and is linked with the Greek elector for shining sun, that is from the Greek electron, meaning amber. There is also evidence in the Phoenician word elikron, meaning shining light. Phaeton is the son of the sun god Helios. When Phaeton, the Shining One, finally learned who his father was, he went east to meet him. He induced his father to allow him to drive the chariot of the sun across the heavens for one day. The horses, feeling their reins held by a weaker hand, ran wildly out of their course and came close to the earth, threatening to burn it. Zeus noticed the danger, and with a thunderbolt he destroyed Phaeton. He fell down into the legendary river Eridanos, where he was found by the river nymphs, who mourned him and buried him. The tears of these nymphs turned into amber. Also, in Plato's Timaeus, Critias tells the story of Atlantis. There have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. There is a story that even you Greeks have preserved, that once upon a time, Phaeton, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long intervals. Eridanos, the river of Hades, is from the ancient Greek Eridanos, meaning amber, and is depicted in ancient Greek writings as being a river in northern Europe that is rich in amber. This river is a metaphor for the Eridanos constellation river in the heavens. Herodotus associated this river with the river Po, since the Po was located near the end of what is called the Amber Trail. Relative words to celas show this with the Latin cella, Italian cella, Spanish silla, Portuguese cela, and many more, all translating as saddle. It is a saddle for the soul, as the Old Dutch cela says, meaning soul. The souls that are sold on the stock market, as the etymologically related French noun cella indicate, meaning saddle. This is the sale of the spinal energy, seminal fluid, as shown through the Romanian șel, translated as the part of the backbone or spine near the lumbar region of the back, and loin. Loin is also by definition the reproductive organs, which bring the Christmas X-moon gifts of Saturn through the wormhole, as indirectly hinted at in the translation of loin into the French word rein, the reindeer of the double X20 chromosomes that helps Satan X deliver the loan of loin under the tree of life, as the German word Lenda indicates, meaning loin. A great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn occurs every 18 to 20 years. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk is said to have 50 names, the 50th name being Nibiru. Nibiru was used by the Babylonians as a name for Jupiter. Neb means Lord in Egyptian. In the Simpsons Stonecutters episode, Homer is told that the real emergency number is 912. The significance of this is found when we multiply 9 by 12, which is 108. At each event, Starmus holds what is called the 108-minute roundtable discussion, in reflection to the symbol of the 108 minutes that Yuri Gagarin spent as the first man in space in 1961.
I'm making a difference. I'm experiencing how life works. I'm learning new things. I'm taking on the world. I'm helping other people. I'm ready for college. I'm having so much fun. I'm making the world a better place. I'm ready for life. I'm setting the example. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm a rainbow girl. I'm a rainbow girl. I'm a rainbow girl. I'm a rainbow girl. I'm a rainbow girl.
I'm a rainbow girl. I know. It sounds a little silly, but in the next few minutes, I will be explaining exactly what that is and the culture behind the International Order of the Rainbow for Girls. Let's start off with the basics. The International Order of the Rainbow for Girls, or IORG, is a Masonic youth leadership group for girls ages 11 through 20, and was founded by Reverend W. Mark Sexton in 1922. Originally, it was just a girls' group for girls who were daughters of Masons, but today it accepts girls of all backgrounds. The only requirements to be a rainbow girl is to be a good moral character and have a belief in a supreme being, which are requirements of all Masonic affiliated groups. After a girl expresses her interest in joining, she then goes through an interview process, is voted on to receive the degrees of the order by local chapter's members, and then receives her initiation. In this way, it is similar to a sorority. Rainbow girls have an interesting way of dressing. At formal events, such as initiations, meetings, and the annual state convention, girls are required to wear long dresses. At more informal events, such as dinner servings or fundraising projects, girls wear white flats, khaki pants or jeans, and the state IORG red shirt. In addition, for state officers, they are required to put their hair up in a hairpiece, which I have worn for you today. Rainbow girls also have a specific way of public speaking, from reciting ritual work at close meetings and giving flag tributes and speeches at public events. Girls develop a unique way of speaking. Girls are also required to completely memorize all of their public speaking work. As such, the speech I'm giving for you today is both 100% memorized and given in the way a rainbow girl would recite it.
Most people recognize us by being in the parades, where we are the pretty girls in long formals with the tiaras on our heads and even the nice pretty cars. But most people really don't know what we actually do as an organization. And you're probably asking, well, really, what is Rainbow? Is it good for my daughter? Will it be fun? How can I get involved? What can you learn from this organization? Well, we should probably start from the beginning. There are many ways to get involved. Family is a good place to start, and if you know somebody that is in the Masonic family, like, say for instance, a Rainbow Girl, a Mason, an Eastern Star, a D-Malay, or even a Job's Daughters, they can pretty much help you out in getting involved. But friends are good too. They can help integrate you. And, well, if you don't have anyone, then there are even websites. If you want to get involved and don't know how to contact the assemblies, you can go to gorainbow.com, which will connect you to the state assemblies and then individual assemblies near you. Most girls get involved to Rainbow when they're 11 years old, but sometimes even younger and sometimes much older. When you are finally initiated into our assembly, you become not only part of the Rainbow Girls, you become part of a community. A sisterhood that will help you every step until you turn 21, but even after, you can still be involved. Our adults in our organization are our greatest source of help.
This is how they indoctrinate kids at the world. Girl, end of
you through anything and even make you laugh. They treat you as if you were their own daughter, and because of that, parents can actually also get involved.
This is the end of the beginning. Welcome to today's show. Today I want to cover the Rainbow Girls. The International Order of the Rainbow for Girls is the official name for it, IORG, which is a Masonic order used to recruit young girls at a young age to prepare them to become witches of the Eastern Star. Because these are organizations that are in your towns, our towns, my town, your town, every town across America and around the world. These secret societies have Masonic lodges existing in our towns, worshiping Lucifer, and recruiting other people to join their quote-unquote club. And then, of course, as they always do, they prey on what? They prey on the children. And this is how they indoctrinate kids at a young age to prepare them to become Eastern Star witches. Now, you could see the logo, pretty obvious right there. You could see the pyramid. And, of course, you could see the Masonic handshake right underneath it. It's a Masonic youth service organization. And they claim that they teach leadership training through community service. Girls ages 11 through 20 to 21 learn about the value of charity and service through their work and involvement with their annual, local, and grand service projects. They also have a group for younger girls 5 to 10, which is the pledge group. So they start with them at 5 to 10, indoctrinate them, get them into this pledge group, start brainwashing them. Then they move to the Order of the Rainbow for Girls around the age of 11. And then at that point, they're in there until about they're 20 years old, 21 years old. And then they get initiated into the Eastern Star. And that's how they keep this cycle going. They're telling you who they are, and they're using mind control methods to deflect off of it because people are dumb and they'll just take this answer and they'll believe it. This is the International Order of the Rainbow for Girls is a youth service organization for young women. It is associated with the Masonic fraternity, but it is not required to be related to a Mason or Eastern Star member in order to join. Although members are required to uphold the belief in a supreme being, girls are encouraged to participate actively in the house of worship of their choice. And then when it goes on to talk about the cult, it should say yes with an exclamation point. But it says the International Order of the Rainbow for Girls is a youth service organization for young women, much like Girl Scouts. Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit different than Girl Scouts. Okay, these people aren't, walking around selling cookies outside the grocery store here. They're being indoctrinated with a belief system and worshiping Lucifer and that they're their own gods. This is more like child abuse. Rainbow girls wear a uniform for formal function. Girls are required to wear white or colored gowns for their casual functions. Girls are required to wear khaki shirts with a white shirt with no writing and a blue blazer or a nice dress. They have these bizarre clothing, this etiquette of clothing. I mean, we see the Masonic men. They got grown men wearing bibs. I mean, I don't know how many times I got to say it. How embarrassing is that? Guy's wearing bibs and white gloves. Looks like he's about to dust. Looks like a butler. Walking around acting like he knows the secrets of the world. Yeah, the secret's out, boys. The secret's out. God's revealing all of this stuff to everyone. And people are going to become livid the more they find out about what you people really do in secret, because nothing good is done in secrecy. It goes on to say, what is the ritual? Our ritual is the book of ceremonies based on lessons of right living and thinking. You see, they can just say stuff like that and people just go, oh, I don't know what that means, but okay. Because they're not going to go, our rituals are satanic based off of many, many, many different satanic teachings from cults, from, ancient Egypt, from Aleister Crowley. No, they just go, it's based on lessons of right living and thinking. And people go, oh, okay. Huh? What does that mean? What does it mean, lessons of right living and thinking? Huh? Anyone want to explain that? It's just them deflecting the best that they can, or trying to. And of course, inside these orders, they have all of these positions, drill leader, chaplain, treasurer. I mean, these people need to get a life, really. The mother advisor is the primary adult who works with the girls. They have high honors. They have supreme assembly. So they have all these organizations within it. And of course, remember, that's kind of how all these secret societies, like even false religions like Scientology work, is that it's like a system where you achieve things, right? So you start at the bottom, but if you do this, you do this, you do this, oh, you could become this, and you could become that, and you could achieve this part, or you could become a member of this other society within the society, and you could have this title or this name, and here's a brownie for you, And people love this stuff. This is how they manipulate people to kind of keep going, to keep digging deeper, to keep, learning about, what the Masons want you to learn, which is about worshiping Lucifer ultimately. And they reward you along the way. So it's just a mind control method they use. But this, to me, and I'm sure you all would agree, is child abuse. This should not be allowed. So if you see Rainbow for Girls or whatever, or the Pledge in your town, because listen, they'll come out of the woodwork when they have these stupid little parades. Some towns have parades. I'm sure a lot of you guys live in towns where there's parades for something once in a while, or they'll have something where, outdoors for everyone in the town to get together. They'll pop out for that. Okay, the Masons will pop out. They'll have their dish, looking for money and trying to quietly recruit people, acting like they're just normal guys who are here to help the community. So will the Eastern Star, and so will this organization, because they'll have a table set up with them to recruit young girls. They should be approached. People should be going to their townships and having this program removed, because people don't even know what they're being taught. They're just going, oh,
based off of the Vatican domus, and so what we've got now is the Holy Roman Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire. Go back into history and look and ask the question in history. Go back to the reference books on the Roman Empire and find out, where did Caesar rule Rome from? Caesar was emperor of Rome, and Rome dominated all of Europe. Eastern Europe, Western Europe. Caesar dominated Rome, and Rome dominated Europe. And so, therefore, where did Caesar rule Rome from? He ruled Rome from, Rome is called the City of Seven Hills. And he ruled Rome from something called Capitoline Hill, which was actually Capitol Hill. That's in Roman history. So Caesar ruled the empire from Capitol Hill. And it was said in history books that where Caesar each morning, quote, the reference book says, quote, he would go up on the hill, end quote, to officiate as Caesar before the Roman Senate. So therefore, Rome had a Senate. Where? Up on the hill. What hill? Capitol Hill.
Sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar? And so today we still have Caesar, who believes himself to be God, incarnated Jehovah. He is absolute God over the entire Roman Empire.
So
all people must come and bow down to Caesar. Bow down and sprinkle incense on the altar of Caesar, because he represents Jehovah God. He represents the Almighty God of the universe. He is the Emperor of the world. I'm just saying that today, the President of the United States is considered to be the Emperor of the universe. All people should bow down and sing praises to him, and sing and beat themselves with sackcloth and ashes, and be aware that he represents God. He is the absolute authority over everything. So all of this nonsense about America being the land of the free and the home of the brave, that went out in 1871. It's gone. From here on out, you're under the Roman dictatorship out of Vatican Rome, and that's why today, when the Pope comes here to America, you see George Bush running out and kissing the ring. All the politicians, left and right-wing politicians, communists, Nazis, fascists, doesn't matter who they are, they all ran out and kissed the Pope's ring, because America is the new Rome.
I just looked it up, and Ulysses S. Grant was president in 1871.
Oh, there you go. So what is going on here today is not against the Constitution. It's not against the Declaration of Independence. It's not against the law. If you go to work at Sears or General Motors or any corporation, they tell you when you can go to work. You show up here at 7 o'clock, not 7:10, 7 o'clock. You take a break at 10 o'clock. You take another break at 3, and you're not asking questions. We're telling you. And here's what you're going to do. Here's the job you're going to be assigned to. Now, do you want the job or don't you? If you don't like it, that's all right. Hit the street. We'll get somebody who does want it. So the point being is that what General Motors is doing to you, telling you when you can come in, when you can go home, when you can take a break, you ask permission. If you want to go to the bathroom, if you want to take a break, you ask permission. You don't just get up and walk off the job. So the point being is that they own you for that 8 hours or 9 hours you're at work. They own you. You live by their rules. As long as you're inside that corporation working, they're the boss, not you. So, therefore, if you say you're a U.S. citizen, you are in fact an employee of a foreign corporation that was in Washington, D.C., and therefore it is not unlawful what they're doing. It's not illegal what they're doing. You are an employee. It's a very clever manipulation of an exploitation and a manipulation of a circumstance that happened because of the Civil War. After the Civil War, here's what I am told by people who know. I am not an authority on this subject. I have said over and over, I'm not an authority on any subject. What I bring to the table is the fact that I've been in the company of extraordinarily brilliant people for the last 40 years or 45 years of my life. I've been in the company of incredibly intelligent people doing extraordinarily brilliant things. And I've listened to the teachers. I've listened to Jesuit scholars, to politicians, to statesmen, to royalty of Europe. I've been in the company of impressive people, just listening. I'm not the authority on anything. I'm just telling you what I've heard from experts.
So it started with this pope called Boniface, and Boniface created a bill, a papal bull called Unam Sanctam, in which he basically forces the entire world under the power of the Vatican. This is the ultimate evil that controls this reality. And I'm not saying that all the nuns and monks are a problem, no, but the pastors are a problem because they put all these stupid ideas into their heads, and the Vatican as an authority and as a legal ground for canon law and hence maritime admiralty and uniform commercial code and the entire law of religion and commerce.
By faith, we are obliged to believe and to maintain that the Church is one, holy, Catholic, and also apostolic. We believe in her firmly, and we confess with simplicity that outside of her there is neither salvation nor the remission of sins, as espoused in the Canticles proclaims. One is my dove, my perfect one. She is the only one, the chosen of her who bore her, and she represents one sole mystical body whose head is Christ, and the head of Christ is God. In her there is one Lord, one faith, one baptism. There had been at the time of the deluge only one ark of Noah, prefiguring the one church, which ark, having been finished to a single cubit, had
Benedetto Caetani had introduced a secret speaking tube into Celestine's cell at the Castello Nuovo, and in the small hours of the night simulated the voice of God, warning the pontiff of the flames of hell were he to continue in his office. On December 13th, 1294, Celestine V gathered his cardinals, took off his papal vestments and read out a formal abdication letter drafted by Benedetto Caetani, who was, surprise, surprise, immediately thereafter elected as Pope Boniface VIII. Boniface had always been a staunch supporter of the Angevin cause, which is why Charles II allowed him to be crowned in Naples and let him leave for Rome with his predecessor in tow. When Boniface VIII and his cardinals reached Rome, they found that old Celestine had absconded, presumably trying to get back to his hermit hut in the mountains. It took the papal minions a while to catch the old man, who seemed to have been still quite fleet of foot. When he is brought before Boniface, he utters a prophecy. You have entered like a fox. You will rule like a lion, and you will die like a dog. After that, the ex-pope was locked up in a remote castle, where he died a few years later. Boniface VIII was indeed in many ways a lion amongst the popes. He founded the University of Rome, codified canon law, re-established the Vatican Library and Archives. And note, he actually spent some time of his pontificate in Rome, something few of his predecessors had been able to. And he was also able to push back against the encroachment by the Angevins. Now what he had nothing of, though, was spirituality. For him, the church and its powers to bind and loose, to excommunicate and depose, served solely political or financial purposes. He declared the year 1300 a holy year, inviting pilgrims to come to Rome, offering full and copious pardons for all sins, confessed or not. That brought 200,000 pilgrims to the Holy City and vastly enriched the papal coffers. The crowds were so huge, the main basilicas introduced one-way systems for pilgrims to pass along the great relics, whilst the sacristans needed rakes to gather up all the money offerings. Dante sets his Divine Comedy in the year 1300, and the regimentation of the crowds in hell is modelled on the management of the pilgrims on the Ponte Sant'Angelo. The other thing Boniface lacked was any kind of diplomatic finesse. Conciliation or compromise were alien concepts to him. That brought him quite quickly into conflict with various monarchs in Europe, most specifically with Philip IV, the Fair of France. The conflict began when Philip put a heavy tax on the French clergy to fund the 100 Years' War that was just about to kick off. Boniface used the opportunity to state once and for all that no church in Christendom could be taxed by a mere monarch without the express permission from Rome. Philip responded by banning papal tax collectors from entering and leaving France, thereby cutting the curia off from one of its main sources of income. At the same time, Boniface got into a spat with the powerful Colonna family in Rome. Some Colonna supporters had hijacked a transport of gold bullion destined for the Vatican, possibly encouraged to do so by King Philip. In response, Boniface placed garrisons into the main Colonna strongholds, had 2 Colonna cardinals, who had nothing to do with the affair, stripped of their rank, and excommunicated the family en masse. But his most implacable opponents came from within the church itself. There is a more radical wing of the Franciscans, and they had been shocked by the managed abdication of Celestine V. For these minor brothers, who pursued a life of asceticism and poverty, Celestine had been the ideal pope. The angel pope, sent to defeat Antichrist and bring on, that old chestnut, the 1,000 years of bliss. They loathed the worldly Boniface and all he stood for. They accused Boniface for having killed Celestine V, the true, legitimate pope. There we are. By a wondrous twist of fate, it is the pope and not the emperor who is now denounced from church pulpits. the Franciscans are calling him out not just for his nepotism, avarice and simony, but for the full gambit, ranging from murder, illegitimacy, idolatry and sodomy. Just replace the name Frederick II with Boniface and you get a rerun of the PR campaigns of the 1240s. The similarity is no surprise because both were run by the Franciscans. John Julius Norwich thought that within 3 or 4 years Boniface was the most detested pope that ever lived, which is quite an achievement given the breadth of the field. Boniface is not one to back down though. He suspected that a lot of his problems had been orchestrated in Paris, so that is where he keeps pushing back. When Philip the Fair imprisoned a bishop, Boniface responds by ordering the king to immediately release the bishop and summons the king and his bishops to come to the papal court to defend their actions. Philip obviously refused, but surprisingly 39 French bishops show up in Rome in November 1302. There, Boniface fired his final broadside. Based on liberal quotations from our friends, Bernard of Clairvaux and Thomas Aquinas, he offered the broadest definition of papal absolutism in his bull Unam Sanctam. That is the famous quote, "It is altogether necessary for the salvation for every human creature to be subject to the Roman pontiff."
Solely from History Profiles, in this video I will give you the details of Pope Boniface VIII's life. This video may have you questioning reality. How could a man that has reached the highest rank in the church worship Satan? Let's get into the video and find out. First, let's look at his early life. Pope Boniface's birth name is Benedetto Caetani, and he was born in 1230 in Anagni, an ancient town just south of Rome. He was born into the upper class. His family were barons of the Papal States, so growing up, Benedetto would have had an advantage. He was soon sent to the monastery of the Friars Minor, where he would learn Latin and grow knowledgeable in religious texts. Benedetto was a man of ambition and wanted to progress and make his mark on the world. He managed to land a job as a secretary to Cardinal Simon de Brion. Now, a cardinal is the most senior member of the clergy to the Catholic Church, being second only to the Pope himself. Now, being the secretary was nothing like being a secretary today. He had to travel with the cardinal all over Europe. In 1265, Benedetto would make his way all around Europe and would remain in England until 1268 in order to try to stop a rebellion against King Henry III of England. After 1268, the trail on Benedetto's life goes missing. Nothing is known of his whereabouts or what he was doing during this time. For 8 years, he disappears from history. He reappears in 1276, where he was sent to France to supervise the collection of a payment that was intended for the church. Benedetto had been sent around Europe, had done several jobs for the church without question, and now his time had come. On the 12th of April, 1281, Pope Martin IV made Benedetto a cardinal. He was now a powerful member of the church, but was it enough for him? As the years went by and the popes came and went, Benedetto had his eyes set on one thing, and that was the papal throne. On the 13th of December, 1294, Pope Celestine V abdicated after 5 months as pope. Now this was very unusual. Bartholomew of Lucca, a medieval historian, witnessed many of the events and conversations surrounding the abdication of Pope Celestine, and recounted that Benedetto heavily pressured the Pope to abdicate. Why did the Pope relinquish his power? Questioned and disputed his every human creature be subject to the Roman Pope. Many kings of Europe now saw the Pope as a man who was drunk on church is one. Since the church is necessary for salvation, and since Christ appointed Peter to lead it, it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman Pope. Many kings of Europe now saw the Pope as a man who was drunk on power, and who came to the papal throne through questionable means. The church was divided, and the illusion of power that protected the Pope was diminishing due to the dark aura that surrounded his rule. The Pope was making enemies all over Europe. The Prince of Germany and Philip, the King of France, both questioned and disputed his so-called supremacy over them. Pope Boniface would also make enemies in his own camp. In 1297, the Pope excommunicated a cardinal from the College of Cardinals, which would lead to a bitter feud. The former cardinal, whose name was Giacomo Colonna, accused the Pope of having been elected illegally following the unprecedented abdication of Pope Celestine V. These accusations infuriated the Pope and led to war. Colonna's revolt, however, was in vain. He was captured within a year. Under the command of the Pope, he had Palestrina and other towns that had revolted razed to the ground, even after their surrender and the Pope's assurance that they would be spared. Even the highest ranking of the Church would give false promises and lack forgiveness and empathy. There was also a rivalry between Pope Boniface and King Philip of France due to the power struggle between Pope and King. King Philip wanted the wealth of the Catholic Church in France to stay in France and would pass laws to stop the export of gold, silver, and precious stones from France to the Papal States. This was the start of a long-lasting feud that would expose the Pope as a tyrannical man, and also maybe something far more dark. The Pope would issue another papal bull named Ausculta Fili. This document conveyed that King Philip of France should listen to the Vicar of Christ as the spiritual monarch who stood above all earthly kings. The document would reach King Philip of France, and upon reading it, he threw it into a fire. Pope Boniface, however, underestimated King Philip. In the shadows, Philip was plotting the downfall of the Pope. He gathered lawyers, magistrates, high-ranking church officials who all opposed the Pope. He also had witnesses ready to testify against him. King Philip was so brazen that he even sent an army to arrest the Pope. The grounds of the arrest were enough to convince the people that this Pope had to be deposed and face trial. There had been talk around Europe for years surrounding the Pope, and many believed the charges, and there were many. I shall now read out the charges. He has often said that if nothing else could be done to humble the king and the French, he would ruin himself, the whole world, and the whole church. He has a private demon whose advice he follows in all things, and this is publicly known. He is a soothsayer who consults in oracles, and this is publicly known. He is a sodomite and keeps concubines, and this is publicly known. He is seeking to destroy the faith. He has long harboured an aversion against the King of France, because in France there is and ever was the splendour of the faith, the grand support and example of Christendom. It is notorious that the Holy Land has been lost as a result of his sins. It is notorious that he seeks not the salvation of souls, but their perdition. These charges were merely everything the public was thinking. They believed he had schemed with the devil to rise to the top of the church and had practiced the dark arts in order to commune with the devil who helped him rule. Many thought that the devil had taken command of the church due to its ongoing corruption. In 1303, an army was assembled, led by King Philip's minister, Nogaret. A ghost would also come back to haunt the Pope, as Sciarra Colonna, the relative of the disgraced Cardinal Giacomo Colonna, had joined the army, seeking vengeance. The army attacked the Pope at his palace in Anagni. The Pope was soon arrested and placed into the custody of Nogaret. The Colonna family demanded the Pope's resignation. For the first time in history, the supreme authority of the Pope was diminished and the illusion of power was unveiled. The Pope was treated as your common criminal would have been back then, and was beaten, slapped, and humiliated. However, the people of Anagni rose up in arms and freed the Pope. He would make his way back to Rome, but died shortly after, on the 11th of October, just 1 month after his arrest. He died before his trial. We shall never know what the outcome would have been, or if he would have confessed. Without a doubt, there was a darkness surrounding the rule of Pope Boniface, and his death before his trial seems very convenient. He wronged many people, and was also addicted to power, and would like to remind the kings he saw as beneath him. So what do you think? Do you think that the Pope and the devil co-ruled the church?
So take a look at your passport or your identity card, and you will notice that unless you live in Switzerland, basically every other nation other than Switzerland has the name. Your name on that document is written in all capital letters. All capital letters here means caputis diminutio maxima, meaning complete reduction of all rights. I repeat, complete reduction of all rights. You are considered dead and lost at sea. Here we are again, of course, at the law of the sea, of the Holy See of the Vatican. So this is very important. In Switzerland, only the first letter is written caps, and I think there are 1 or 2 other countries where it is like this. In all other countries, the full name is written in all caps, and all caps means no rights. You are a slave, enslaved. So Capitis diminutio maxima, the greatest capitis diminutio maxima, involved the loss of liberty, citizenship and family, being made a slave or prisoner of war. Capitis diminutio media consisted of loss of citizenship and family without any forfeiture of personal liberty. So media is what we have in Switzerland. It's still a loss of liberty, but it is capitis diminutio or capitis diminutio, diminished capacity, is a term used in Roman law, in canon law, referring to the extinguishing either in whole or in part of a person's former status and legal capacity. There were 3 changes of state or condition attended with different consequences: maxima, media and minima. The greatest capitis diminutio maxima involved the loss of liberty, citizenship and family. Capitis diminutio media consisted of loss of citizenship and family without any forfeiture of personal liberty, and capitis diminutio minima consisted of a person ceasing to belong to a particular family without loss of liberty or citizenship.
First of all money on the earth. Well, let's go back to the Roman Empire. Back in the Roman Empire, it was basically stated in ancient Rome that there were only 2 things on the earth, land and water. And therefore, there were 2 kinds of law to be established on this earth, the law of the land and the law of water. Brilliant. That's all there is land and water. So the law of the land, and people have heard that term, the law of the land. But you don't realize when you use the term law of the land, it's to differentiate between the law of the land as opposed to the law of the sea, the law of the ocean. That's why you use that term law of the land. Because there's another law that dominates the earth. It's called the law of the ocean, the law of the sea. The law of the land is obviously the law of the people who live on a particular piece of land. As many countries as there are, or as many cities as there are, that's how many laws of the land there is, because the law of the land is different in South Africa than it is in America. You can do things in China you cannot do in Egypt. You can do things in America you can't do in Australia because of the law of the land. The land is where the people live, so it's the law of the custom of the people who live on that particular piece of land. They have decided for themselves what their customs will be. And when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So if you're going to go to Australia, you're going to go to South Africa, you're going to go to Egypt, you better learn what they can do and what they can't do. And if you don't like it, then you go back home where you can do what you want to do. But if you're in somebody else's country, you have to abide by their custom, the law of the land. Now, there is another law called the law of the sea, the law of the ocean. That is the banking law, because you can get a credit card in America and go to China and live pretty well and go vacation. Or you can get a credit card in Africa, in South Africa, and go to China on vacation and eat very well and live very well and go on a vacation. Why? Because it doesn't have anything to do with the custom of the people. We're talking money. Period. It's just money. One law of the sea, water. So we say in America, money goes through your hands like water. No, money is water. Maritime Admiralty law of England. The law of the sea is the law of banking. Banking law is referred to as the law of the sea. Therefore, let me explain to you. When a ship pulls into harbor, we may have talked about this before, but it's important, so we need to hear it again. When a ship pulls into a harbor, first of all, you need to understand, according to international law, all ships are female. There is no such a thing as a male ship. All ships by law are female. That's why you will hear captains say, she's a good ship, and she's been seaworthy, she's this and she's that. All captains will refer to their ship. Rocket ship, sailing ship, doesn't matter what kind of airship, the captain calls his plane she. She's a good ship. She's seaworthy. Why? Because all ships by law are considered female. Reason why? Because all ships, any kind of a ship, delivers a product. And so the idea goes back into the ancient world of Sumeria, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, where the idea was the male manufactures, but the female produces the product. So therefore, we humans were manufactured, but your mother was in labor and in the delivery room because she was building a product.
And giving birth.
And giving birth to a product. Therefore, when a ship pulls into a harbor, she parks at the dock. And where she parks at the dock, she ties off a rope onto the dock to hold her in her berth. Every item coming off of that ship from anywhere in the world to anywhere in the world, doesn't matter. We're talking business. We're talking banking. Any item on that ship coming off that ship must have something called a certificate of manifest, because yesterday the ship wasn't here, but today we come to work and there's a ship here from Japan or from China with $800 million worth of televisions or whatever, so it has manifested. $800 million worth of business is meaning every piece coming out that ship has to be accounted for. How much does it weigh? What color was it? Does it have 4 doors, 2 doors? Air conditioning? No. What color? And so every item coming off the ship must have its own certificate of manifest. Why? Because it was brought in, she brought it in on water, and she is in her berth. So therefore, each item has to have what is called a birth certificate. A certificate of manifest, because she is sitting in her berth, B-E-R-T-H, a birth certificate. Therefore, when your mother gave birth to you, you came down her birth canal. when her water broke. And therefore, you come out into the world as a maritime admiralty product. You came out of water down the canal. Therefore, you have to have a birth certificate, a certificate of manifest. Because last night you weren't here. This morning you're here. You manifested. So we got to know, how much did you weigh? The hospital has to say how much you weigh. What color was he? Did he have 5 fingers? Yes. Why? Because you are considered a maritime admiralty product, because she was in labor building you after your father manufactured. So once you begin to see how the commercial world works, you are nothing more than a product, a maritime admiralty product, to be bought and sold, and therefore you have to have a birth certificate. Now, if you're taking one of those cars or TVs off of the ship and it drops down accidentally and breaks, you just lost money. You can't sell that one and make any money off of it. That's okay. Things like that happen. Okay? And there's no problem with that in commerce. If you break something, it's no problem. We take that off of our taxes. There's a loss. But you have to have a death certificate. And it's got to be signed by the doc. Why? Because that's what the damn thing fell and broke, was at the dock. So the doc has to sign your birth certificate. And if you die there, then he has to sign your death certificate. And we better make sure that the doctor is not lying about the death certificate. Because if you're lying about the death certificate, that's prison time for a doctor. You don't want to lie. Did this person, was he born dead? Yes. Prove it. Sign the paper and put your life on the line as a doctor and tell me that this person died at birth. And if we find out you're lying, because now he doesn't have to pay taxes, he doesn't have to be under government control, he's totally free because we don't know anything about him, and we find out you're lying, that's a felony for doctors. You go to jail for that. So therefore, doctors will have to sign your birth certificate. They have to sign your death certificate. Why? Because you are a maritime admiralty product. Your mother created you. After you were manufactured, you were created, and she was in her labor. She was in labor in the delivery room because she was delivering you as a product. And that's why in your birth certificate, on the bottom, on the right-hand bottom of the birth certificate, where your mother or father signed, look at it. Look on the birth certificate. It doesn't say mother or father. It doesn't say parent. Where your mother and father signed, it says informant. Your mother and father was informing the corporation that the new television has just arrived in America, or a new car, a new automobile has just arrived that you didn't know about. So it's called an informant. Now, on the left side of your birth certificate, on the very bottom, you will see in small print, the birth certificate is the property of the United States Commerce Department, Department of Commerce. Why? It's because your birth certificate is a commercial document. It's on actual banking paper. It's on banking paper. It's considered a stock, just like a stock certificate. So once you understand that you are, that's why if you say, if your son's getting married or your daughter's getting married and she's marrying a very wealthy, marrying into an extremely wealthy family, we say, well, her fiance she's marrying, he's of good stock. What do you mean? She's marrying a pig or marrying a horse? No, because all humans are considered stock. That's why if you're going to... It's an incredible story about how we are maritime admiralty stock. We are like a stockyard. That's why all, when we were growing up as kids in America, all houses and homes always had a yard, a front yard and a backyard. That's for your children to play in because it was a stockyard. And we still have stockyards today. That's why you're creating a product for the commercial world that we live in, and so to protect the product, you give them a backyard to play in. So it's called a stockyard.
So as soon as we're born, we are signed over to the United States or whatever country we live in.
That's right.
To our government.
That's right. And they own your body.
Are we signed over to the government or the country?
Well, the government is the country. The government.
So the United States of America, let's say?
No, not to the United States of America. No, you're signed over when you're born here in this country. You're signed over to the United States, not the United States of America. There's a world of difference between the sun and the moon, between wet and dry, between up and down.
Right.
Opposites. Well, there's a big difference between United States or United States of America. Doesn't mean the same thing at all. United States of America is one thing. United States is totally different than the United States of America. That's the point that most people don't know anything about. So when you use the term United States, you're not talking about the United States of America, the collective 50 states in the federal union. United States is not the 50 states. United States is a totally different entity completely.
No.
United States of America was founded in 1776 as a constitutional republic, but that was done away with in 1871. We're no longer living in the United States of America. As of 1871, we are now living in something called the United States. This is why once a year, United States is considered not a country. United States of America is a country. It's a confederation of states, which we call the federal enclave, the federal states, the federal republic. But United States by itself is a company, is a corporation, incorporated in 1871. A group of men got together after the Civil War and incorporated a company.
In Delaware.
Well, anyone can form a corporation. Anybody.
So we could have done it.
You can form a corporation. But if you form a corporation, then you are now under corporate law. You can't do certain things you could do as an individual. Now you're a corporation. But, of course, you get certain perks as a corporation, too. So there's some good and there's some bad. There's some up and there's some down. Now, certain things you can do now as a corporation you couldn't do as by yourself. So corporation is a business. Well, anybody can form a corporation, but if you form a corporation, as I said, you're under corporate law, which means the first thing right off the bat is that you have to have, according to corporate law, a president of the corporation. You also have to have, according to... And so, as I said, back in 1959, I became very interested in the world of the occult as it applies to, or the hidden world, as it applies to politics and religion. And within the past 25 years, I have begun to look at the occult or hidden world of commerce and how banks and government works. The one thing I will say that the past 50 years has given me is I would say that nothing in this world works the way you think it does. Nothing. Governments do not operate the way you think they do. Banks do not do what you think they do. The police department is not here for what you think it is. Nothing in your world works the way you think it does. There's a far higher, bigger picture going on the earth for at least 7,000 years of human history that we modern day people really just don't relate to. All we know is what we live with today, but never suspecting that the institutions of power, banking, education, the military-industrial complex of the world has taken hundreds of years to develop. And over these last hundreds of years, great governments have come into being. Our great country of America, the United States of America, which was the first time on the history of the earth that a people rose up to demand their freedom and impacted the whole world. Because there's never been a time, I don't care when you look back and how far back you go into history, never been a time when the people of any country have ever raised up to declare their freedom. It's never happened. And that's what made America so interesting and so provocative back in the 1800s, is that Americans decided they wanted to be free. So what a clever idea that was. No one had ever tried that before. And of course, when you are a slave, and you are considered to be a slave, when you declare yourself to be free, you're going to make some enemies. And you're going to terrorize your masters who thought they owned you. So now you're going to be a terrorist. And they are now able to kill you because you're a terrorist. Why? Because you have terrorized your masters who thought they owned you. And now they see that the slaves are deciding to revolt and don't want to be owned anymore. And they want to be free. And so there was a war. We call it the Revolutionary War.
The English word venire is a law term that means to summon a group of people for jury service. This is related to the religious term venial for a forgivable transgression, or one that is pardonable. That's why there are venial sins. The Latin venia or venia meant a pardon and the granting of a privilege, which people now know as a license, because the word license is rooted in licentiousness, which is indulgence in sensuality, and to be given license is to be given the motive to disregard any forms of self-restraint at the cost and expense of others and the environment. The archaic term venery translates as hunting and sexual intercourse, which is where the term venereal disease is derived, because commerce is about the hunt, where people hunt for a good deal, and it's about killing the competition, and why there are executors or execution sales. Continuing with the connections is the English word vendu, which means a sale, and a sale is phonetically a sale, because the Latin venti and ventus, or venti and ventus, both mean wind, the wind that's needed to blow the sails. The Italian vento also means wind, while the French law word vente gives us a sale, contract of sale. Of course, this is about selling us into slavery through the womb, which is shown in the English venter, meaning womb, that came from the same Latin spelling, and the related Latin masculine noun vanus, meaning sale, purchase, since Venus represents the clams, money, bucks, used during our purchase. Venus is the Roman goddess of sexual love and generation, and the term venter is why the English language has in commercial terms a vendor or vendors. Humans are sold into commercial slavery, since venal means to be a mercenary, someone who is purchasable or bribable, while the Latin venalici translates as slave dealer. We are hunted in the chase during each purchase. This is the pure chase, where they make a clean kill, because to deprive something of everything that they have is to clean them out. They've taken you to the cleaners, which in esoteric terms means that after death, your mind and all of your known conscious history of this life will be erased and wiped out. The cache of your hard drive mind will be deleted, and then you will have a clean slate. This is why no one remembers where they have come from or where they are going. This is a fact, and one that makes many humans angry upon hearing it, because it is the truth that is easier to deny than face. We have been double-crossed, as shown by a final relation that will be proven out with the Italian venti, Portuguese vint, and French vin, all translated as 20. The number 20 in Roman numerals is written as XX. We have been double-crossed and sold into this system.
Cesarchy and sovereignty. The legal fiction is a construct on paper and a state in trust. When you are in receipt of a bill or a summons in court, it is always in capital letters, similar to tombstones or in graveyards. Capital letters signify death. They are writing to that fiction. A legal fiction was created when someone informed the government that there was a new vessel in town based upon your birth. These are legal fictions created and owned by the government in which created it. We are considered a legal fiction, a concept expressed by name or symbol. The legal person has no consciousness, ens legis, a name, word written on paper. This traces back to 1666 in London, an independent city-state just like the Vatican Holy See and Washington District of Columbia. Meaning these three, London, Vatican and Washington, are states within a state. The legal fiction is a construct on paper and a state in trust. When you are in receipt of a bill or summons, it is always in caps. The only way to reclaim your dead entity or strawman that the crown created is to become the executor and then collapse the cesse de vie trust and forgive yourself of your debts and then remove yourself from the admiralty law that holds you in custody. We have accepted the claim to accept the summons, yet only the dead can be summoned. There is an obligation to accept any liability which has been created. We are operating in admiralty, law of the sea, not law of the land. A not guilty plea or any plea admits jurisdiction. The strawman, aka legal fiction, is always guilty. It is born guilty, or one could say, born in sin. Barristers and solicitors make a living out of creating controversy. By creating a controversy, you become liable for the case. Honor and dishonor. To remain in honor, you have to accept the claim and settle and discharge it. Then you add conditions, accept on proof of claim and proof of loss. This gives the liability back to them. The legal fiction is always guilty. Only in the high court can real man or woman appear. Games are played in courts, like basketball, football and so on, hence the name court. It is a game with actors, acting on acts. It has to be treated as a game and just business. Courtroom dramas are misinformation. Connecting the dots of the straw man. The straw man, or the cesse de vie Act Trust, is the oldest commerce platform in the world. The Royal Crown of Britain instituted this structure through Parliament to substitute the rights of man and woman, declaring them dead and lost at sea. What sea, you ask? Well, I would claim that this is verily the Dirac Sea, which is also known as the Lake of Fire, and it is also the Lake of Electrons or Fermions, and this is the Samsara, for the Samsara is considered a river or water. Of course, the human body is made of water mostly, and the liquid assets are the humans. The state, in this case London, UK, essentially took custody of all the people and their property and placed it into a trust, taking on the role of trustee, holding title of all said people and property. This is until a living man or woman comes back to reclaim those titles. This fundamental foundation is important to understand, as it is the anchor that underwrites commerce in the United States and the world for that matter. The strawman system is the cornerstone of our economy, and the more one understands how it works, the more effective the approach in cashing in one of those systems that has used to generate currency and profit. In other words, the one of the Vatican banks here in Switzerland, in Basel, in Sion, in Sitten, holds actually all these legal fictions of each person that was birthed, and it's one of the reasons I'm incarnated in Switzerland, because I will make my move against Sitten if I can. Keep in mind, any debt created by the United States of America, the parent legal fiction of Great Britain, is income generated for the corporation. Each strawman account makes up a portion of the overall trust. The more debt that is created, the more currency is created to support the legal fiction. This is the cornerstone of commerce to the federal corporation we call the United States. So the USA is not a state. it is a business. Incorporated via canon law, which is of course the law of the sea and not.
Cash is money in the form of bills or coins. The phonetic word is cash, which is a secret store of valuables or money. By reinterpreting the English, we might say that this could also be pronounced as catch. Cash is catch, or to make a good catch and then store it in the cache. The cache, as already outlined, is also the storage of our memories and experiences that is wiped out after death before we are brought back into the system again. This is where we are put on ice again, because we are frozen assets that have been taken off ice during life and then put back on ice during death. That's the reason for the saying cold hard cash, cash. A synonym for cash is bury, which is where valuable items are kept because we are being held prisoner as valuable items. The dead are buried in boxes, and cash originally meant money box, and the English language derived the word from the French caisse, meaning broke, which is why when you are out of money, energy, you are said to be broke. Cash was also instituted from the Italian cassa for cash, case, and the Latin capsa, meaning locker, box, satchel, church nave. Capsa is synonymous with the Latin arca, meaning ark, coffin, money, wealth, cage, cell, because the Ark of the Covenant is truly about the recharging of cells in the moon that brings the debt back to life. Another Latin word for church nave is capsi, since the nave is the central area of the church, which is esoterically the vaginal canal that leads to the dead Savior that rescues the dead from the clutches of sin, which is the Akkadian god of the moon, since sin is actually the moon and the celestial body of regeneration. This is what the church is symbolizing as you walk down the aisle of its ship, since the Latin navis means ship, and the Spanish nave also translates as ship, vessel for sailing on the sea. During generation, we are linked into this reality through the naval cord, with the word nave showing as being derived from the Old English nafella for naval. The military navy or naval fleet is connected to this as shown by the Latin navale, meaning dock, shipway, and naval is an English adjective to represent that which is connected with or used in the navy. We are the seamen fish that they seize in the seas of space and then put in their box, since the Latin box from the 1879 Lewis and Short Dictionary means fish, while the Latin capsa for box is a derivative of the verb capere, translated as seize, take hold, capture, that is related in the etymology to the English word for heave. At death we are recaptured, seized, and taken hold of to go to heaven, heaven. The English heave is manifested from the Middle English heaven, Old English heban, and is akin to the Old High German hevan, meaning to lift, and Latin capere, to take. To the beings who control this world, it is like shooting fish in a barrel. Cash flow is the excess amount of cash revenues over cash outlays in a given period of time. This is a necessary commerce term that indicates the cash flow of the sea. Banks are the financial institutions that accept deposits and channel money into lending activities. By the terminology of the sea, banks are the sloping edges of land that exist beside a body of water, like the river banks. The banks direct the currents or the currency of the cash flow. The banks are where the cash of dead are buried or stored, giving credence to the ancient accounts of dead spirits being stored in the moon. The debt or dead are deposited into the banks, and it is known as a cash deposit, whereby the debt or dead are then put on trial in front of a judge, as shown by the word bench. It may, or may not, amaze the scientists who will eventually discover that each of us is a mini-universe unto ourselves, and that what science up until now has called an expanding universe is simply the growing or expansion phase of the body that started from its inception or Big Bang and continues to expand and grow until such a time that it reaches a peak in its epoch, upon which point the body universe will begin to contract again. This is the paradox of duality, where each beginning must be followed by an end, which is paradoxically in tandem with its new beginning. If we are to look at the eyes, which have been pronounced to be the windows to the soul, and see the pupil as the black holes of the galaxy, one can begin to appreciate the innate complexity and entanglement that we share with the external universe. The pupil becomes the student of the external by taking in information at the event horizon, which is what mystics and sages for millennia have called the eternal now. This is what science has recently called the point of no return, since the past and the future are no longer separated, and all the information from the external event is transmitted to the internal and then interpreted by the seer. At this stage, there is an energetic release that occurs, which physicist Stephen Hawking has called Hawking radiation, which reduces the mass and energy of the black hole itself. This naturally must occur, because the internal science of paradox has always shown that when something goes in, something else must come back out at the exact same moment. This is the merging and emerging of what existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called in his epic work Being and Nothingness. The vortex of the black hole pupil is where matter and antimatter collide, and the observer is inseparable from the observed, which is why this is called reality. This is because at this crux, time is both eternal and finished, at once. As in science, particles and antiparticles are paired, creating the duality paradox of reality, where one pair is pulled into the vortex to be processed in the infinite fractal of the mind, while the other pair is released into the finite realm of form and tangibility. The particles that are released create a glow, which scientists now call Hawking radiation. The Gnostic would kindly explain to the scientist that this glow is the color of our eyes, otherwise known as the iris. The 0 point of the singularity is the eternal now, which has also been called quite accurately enlightenment. Light is counteracted by darkness, and that which was previously hidden is at once unveiled. It took Stephen Hawking and many other scientists many years to come to the realization that black holes were not a void where energy was simply taken in to be lost forever. Whereas if they had spoken to any experienced mystic, sage, or Gnostic, this fact would have been shown immediately. But such is the state of the sequestered scientific mentality that must prove to itself the existence of the eternal paradox over and over and over again. This is simply one example of why science that exists in solitary confinement without the wisdom of the true gnosis of meditation is a most dangerous and destructive tool. To be fair, not all scientists took immediate agreement with this initial supposition.
If you live in the UK, you are led to believe that the Queen is the only sovereign. This is wrong. The Queen is given authority through the coronation oath. Her oath was a binding contract between the Crown and the people of this nation. This means that we, the people, gave her her sovereignty. And as everyone knows, you can't give away something you do not possess yourself. That means that each and every one of us is sovereign. We each have supreme, independent authority over our own flesh and blood human body. The problem is, we have forgotten we are powerful. We have forgotten that we belong to and are part of one of the most amazing species that to our knowledge has ever existed. We have become media obsessed and in turn obsessed with our own appearance and the way people think about us. The TV is king, but now that is slipping to the constant need to be in touch with our friends. Everything is about fear. Fear of debt, fear of terrorism, fear of ill health, or fear of climate change. This keeps us thinking that we need our government to protect us and rule us. With all this distraction, it is no wonder that most of us didn't notice the massive fraud that our countries and nations around the world have pulled on us. But as you will learn, government is a creation of man, and a creation of man can never be above man. They always need your consent, and this is where your power really lies. With knowledge always comes power, the power not to fear, the power to take a stand against anyone or any corporation that threatens you, the power to say no. It has been said that you need to know that you're in a cage before you can escape from that cage. Let's look into how you're being tricked and how your power is being hidden from you. If you've never heard of the terms legal fiction or straw man, then what you're about to learn is something that sounds so astonishing that it couldn't possibly be true. If I were to tell you that paying your tax, getting a driver's license, registering your car, paying fines, and attending court are all optional and that you are conned into agreeing with them, what would you think? All statutes and acts are optional too. Your straw man is a fictitious legal entity created at your birth through your birth certificate and the registration of that birth.
Okay, my understanding of the legal fiction, which is also referred to as the straw man, the way I explain it when I do talks, I keep it really, really simple. And what I do, I liken it to a game of Monopoly. Now, in a game of Monopoly, you actually have a little token like a dog or a battleship or a hat, you know, like a little top hat, and you move it around the board. Now, I believe that they actually give us a fictional entity which we can actually use or not use. And I believe this is and a lot of other researchers do as well, that this is your name in either uppercase or with a title.
That when each person is born, whenever a human being is born, there's two entities. One is the real entity, which is the human being, the flesh and blood, and the other is a legal fiction, a fictional entity that is nothing more than a piece of paper, the birth certificate. Again, we're duped into believing that these are one in the same, and so we're tricked into representing the legal fiction, the straw man, that birth certificate. So when people get fines and things like that, it's actually consulting the legal fiction, the non-existent entity, the corporate entity that is owned by corporations.
You have any interactions with the bureaucracy, okay? They're not interacting with you.
Rome has dominated Europe for about 2,300 years, starting with the Republic of Rome, then the democratic Rome, and then finally into the empire, the Roman Empire. But 2,300 years, Rome has pretty well dominated Europe. And of course, for 2,300 years, Europe has dominated the planet. So all roads lead to Rome. And therefore, when you're talking about law, you're talking about Rome, a Roman law. And this is why, you know, we have, it's an extraordinary trail or betrayal, I would say, that you have to learn where words come from, you know.
and what the words mean when you go into a court. I always say, if you go, why do you have to go to court? Well, you play tennis on a court. How do you play tennis on a court? You play with a racket. And yeah, and so, and then I was thinking a couple of days ago that Rome has always dominated Europe, and then it just occurred to me, Italy looks like a boot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
they put the boot in your butt. Or they stomp it on your, or they crush you in a corner with their boot. The boot of Italy has booted Europe. It has crushed the human spirit of Europe and gave birth to, a whole empire. So, there's a whole, that's a whole subject we could get into just with the church itself. My friend, I have another friend that's equally as brilliant on this stuff, and he talks about Rome and the church. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this whole thing called the church. What's your take on this whole thing about the Roman church?
Yeah, this definitely is a good segue, because what I found is it's known as the Latin Arch. Remember, you have Constantinople in the east and you had Rome in the west. You get two different, basically Catholic enclaves. And what they did is the Jesuits, when they were down in South America, establishing their settlements, they got kicked out of everything. I mean, people were dying all over the place down there. What they ended up doing is they ended up moving up into St. John the Baptist, the island of St. John the Baptist, which we know of as Puerto Rico now. Right now, I can almost see the light bulb going off on a lot of people.
Yeah,
Because that's where the IRS is.
I'm thinking Pirates of the Caribbean.
You better believe it. Well, what happened was in 1898, through the Spanish-American War, the District of Columbia got, this is all Jesuit stuff, the Society of Jesus. This is how the Catholics actually took over the Republic, through the Jesuits. They established Puerto Rico, this island of St. John the Baptist, which is now Puerto Rico. The United States, I'll call it the District of Columbia, goes into war, the Spanish-American War, and in 1898, they end up getting Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is no different than a Trojan horse. It's a Trojan horse, and then the District of Columbia now is tied to canon law through Puerto Rico, which is still under canon law and always has been. So now you have this D.C. connection, which is the District of Columbia. I have no idea why nobody ever questioned the word Columbia. I still don't get it, why that's even acceptable. But the Latin Arch, I call it the Latin Arch because it's not just Catholicism. This is Latin Catholicism. And it came through Ignatius Loyola. And his whole goal, the only thing he's ever tried to do from the beginning of establishing the Jesuits was to capture the soul of man. That was his whole goal, is to somehow find a way to capture the soul of man. And that afterbirth, legally, is a term called born alive. So even though mom delivers me first, I'm the firstborn, there is a second delivery or a second coming. Uh-oh. Did I just say that out loud? The second coming. Here's the scary part about the afterbirth material, is when they take me home, there's no evidence of me at all. So what they do is they take this left behind afterbirth material, the DNA, the actual DNA, and they take that, and because nobody claims it, nobody claims the left behind afterbirth DNA material, that gets salvaged. Because remember, we're in our mother's water, and we're delivered through that water. What happens to us? Well, when I'm inside my mother's womb, I'm inside that amniotic sac. That stuff that I'm in, that's mother's ship. That's the vessel in mother's waters that I'm traveling in. When I come out of mother, the vessel I arrived in crashes ashore after I do. So I'm number one, I'm the firstborn, but the number two, I call it the little shit, the number two born, the afterbirth, is the vessel
that I arrived in, and it crashes ashore like a wreck, and then they salvage it, Admiralty law, they salvage that wreckage, and that gets a salvage lien put against it. There's your debt. So now there's an unclaimed vessel, the afterbirth material, and what do they do with it? They take the paperwork that my mother left behind, and they apply the name of the paperwork to that vessel. So the afterbirth material now has a name. What is the name of the afterbirth material? In my case, it was Curtis Richard Kallenbach. So Curtis Richard Kallenbach is actually the name of the afterbirth material. Now, let me just prove something to people, because I hate just talking like this and trying to convince people. In Black's Law, 5th edition again, the idea of the legal term called born alive. It says on page 167, being the product of conception after complete expulsion or extraction from mother, irrespective of the duration of the pregnancy, which breathes or shows any other evidence of life, such as beating of the heart, pulsation of the umbilical cord, or definite movement of voluntary muscles, whether or not the umbilical cord has been cut or the placenta is attached. Here's the key line. It says, this is born alive. This is a legal term. It says, each product of such birth is considered live-born and fully recognized as a human person. So all that garbage waste material that comes out of mom after baby Curtis is called born alive, and it's a legal person. Now there's your waste material. Remember, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So they take this waste material, this wreckage. I always think of Amazing Grace, what a wreck. But, I mean, they take this and give it your name. Nobody knows the wiser. None ever can figure this stuff out. And so what we do is that property, that left behind material, is called a foundling child. Let me do one last. I'm only going to do one more legal term here, and this is the foundling. What is a foundling? This is what that afterbirth material is called. Because remember, when mom and dad take baby Curtis home, there's left behind, I call it the floor sweep. There's left behind DNA, waste material, and it's another child of God. It's all defective. It doesn't have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, but the church calls it a child of God, so they have to salvage it. Remember, the word salvage and salvation are the same. That afterbirth material needs salvation. Here's what it says for foundling. Foundling, a deserted or abandoned infant, a child found without a parent or guardian, its relatives being unknown. So when mom and dad take baby Curtis home, the left behind child of God has no known parents. The state picks it up, and it becomes a ward of the courts, a charge to the state. There's the charge. Everything is based upon that foundling state-created child. And from that point forward, all we ever are when we show up in a courtroom is a relative of that defective Rain Man character. So there's your matter. So the subject is the name or the title. The matter is the physical aspect left behind in a hospital. So now they have in their courtrooms, their private courtrooms, subject matter jurisdiction. And we can never weasel our way out of it because it has a matching DNA profile, a matching DNA. So even though it's not us, it looks like us. It is us for all intents and purposes. So we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
So
from the get-go.
There, where do we go from there then? All right, as we grow into the world.
Well, I think
how does
what
that
we need
affect us? In other words,
completely, because the Vatican lays claim to the afterbirth material. And let me go here. I saved a couple of documents that I put together for tonight. I usually don't use notes, but because I'm with you, I decided to do this. Here we go. And you're going to know some of this stuff way better than most people. But this is Unum Sanctum from 1302 from Pope Boniface VIII, November 18th. And the Unum Sanctum, I'm only going to read 2 lines. The first one is this. It says, I'm trying to find, okay, there it is. The spiritual man judgeth of all things, and he himself is judged by no man. The spiritual man judgeth of all things, and he himself is judged by the spiritual man. In other words, the baby that has both mind, body, and spirit. In other words, the whole baby, the firstborn, is never to be judged by another man. But here's the crazy part. Here's the second-born. Here's what Pope says about the second-born. Unless he invent, like Manichaeus, two beginnings, which is false and judged by us heretical, since according to the testimony of Moses, it is not in the beginnings, plural, but in the beginning that God created heaven and earth. Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. He has, in 1302, remember, the afterbirth has been there since the beginning of time. These mystery school guys, the priests that have been around forever, the afterbirth always followed baby out. This is not new. So what they did, the Pope says the spiritual man, the firstborn baby,